Welcome to our Fantasy Minute, where we go through the best and the worst of Fantasy LCS this week. Let's start it off strong with the studs and my new magic powers. These guys are going to be the ones that you want to start on your roster. Phoenix at the end there may be a little bit of a question mark to you guys, but considering all the low ownership rates between these players, and Phoenix especially, he's putting up a lot of points per game, more than the average Fantasy LCS mid laner. He's got a hard matchup against Immortals this week, but Immortals have been known to also give up a lot of fantasy points, so try out Phoenix this time around. But now, the duds. These are the guys you may want to replace with some of those studs, or at least put on the bench for this week. GBM at the end especially has been very iffy. It's a little funny because he's actually averaged to put up more fantasy points per game than normal this week, but he's going up against a tough opponent in Cloud9, and his projected total is actually significantly lower than most fantasy LCS mid laners, so stay away from GBM this week. But finally, the risky picks of the bunch. These are guys, if you want to make up some big points in your league, you might want to go with them. Sunstar and Mr. Raz have some average or above average in difficulty schedules, so they're a little bit of a safer pick, especially because they've been so consistent, but Ninja on Envy is a bit of a question mark. Envy has been slumping recently, and Ninja's kind of in this go big or go home mentality when it comes to fantasy points, especially because him and Lot are the two main providers and the two main carries that teams are going to look to shut down. That's all the time we got for this week, but if you want to check out more, head over to the LOL Esports YouTube, where I'll be answering questions from the Fantasy LCS subreddit. So we gathered a bunch of your questions from the Fantasy LCS subreddit and decided to give some answers to some, and some of you guys were pretty spot on with your fantasy advice as well. However, user Bird did ask that, will a mid-tier LCS team ever be consistent? Because from week to week, there's always seemingly someone in the middle of the pack who winds up doing pretty well. Well, Bird, welcome to the EU LCS, where anybody can beat anyone and ties are everywhere in the air. Giants, Roccat, and Schalke, the guys that you mentioned in your post, the weeks that they did well, they had both one upset against a higher seeded team and one very big win against a lower seeded team than them in the standings at that time. So similar teams this week that you'll be looking at in EU LCS are going to be Vitality, Unicorns of Love, or H2K. All of their matchups line up very similarly to where these teams were looking earlier in the split, so they might be where you're looking for if you want to try to find some value players to pick up. The best format for this is going to be the best of game, because ties in EU mean one win apiece for each team, and one win in a game is where you usually get most of your fantasy points. A lot of the times these players also identify as our risky picks on the Fantasy PTL segment, so if you're looking for individual players that may have a lot of those high performances, take a look at that. Now also, user Twinkie Savior, that's, I guess he's like an apocalypse and he's trying to save all of them. But he asked us if Febivin was worth keeping around recently, and Bird, who was a little perplexed about the mid-tier teams, had some pretty good advice about Fnatic, who's at the top of the tables in EU. He told you that at this point in time, you're really going to have to look at the waiver wire, whether it's a downgrade into actually having Febivin or trading for, probably in the best circumstances, somebody like Phoenix or Pobelter are going to be the best ways that you can try to upgrade your mid lane. Personally, I think Febivin's going to have a pretty good week this week, but if you're still iffy about past and future performances, you may be looking for that trading block or picking somebody up in your fantasy league that's available. Phoenix was a stud this week, you might want to try picking him up. But if you guys want to have your questions answered here on the Fantasy PTL Minute, which is my new name for this segment because I keep messing it up, you guys can, of course, head on over to the Fantasy LCS subreddit, ask away, get some answers, give some of your own feedback, and join in the conversation.